Welcome, friends, to Podcast with Jen. My name's Jen Stebbing, and I'll be your host, diving headfirst into the world of podcasting, content creation, and the wild ride of freelancing. Together, we'll unpack the magic behind creating awesome content, nailing digital marketing, and living that freelance life. You can think of this podcast as our cozy hangout spot. Whether you're a pro creator or just dipping in your toes, I've got you covered. Every week, we'll dish out real talk chats, expert insights, and super practical tips to level up your game and be a boss in the digital space. From tips to make your podcast pop, to content creation hacks that will make your creative heart sing, we're diving deep into it all. Oh, and believe me, I'll be spilling the tea on my own wins and fails along the way. So grab your favorite drink, get comfy, and let's explore the exciting world of podcasting and content creation every Monday on Podcast with Jen. Hi friends, welcome back to another episode of Podcast with Jen. My name's Jen Stebbing, and I'll be your host as we dive into the world of podcasting, content creation, and what it's like to be a freelancer in this economy. I'm so happy you're joining us today, and I'm really excited to tell you about today's topic. I figured we'd start at the beginning. We've gotten through the introduction. Last week, you learned a little bit about me and my experience in the podcast industry, and now I want to talk about podcasting. Back in 2012, when I started working with podcasting, creating content in some form, I really didn't know the history or the etymology of the industry. And researching for this podcast, actually, I was surprised at how far back the history of podcasting goes. I mean, we're heading into 20 years of podcasting, which is amazing. And think of how far it's come over that 20 years, especially in the last 10. Okay, so let's talk the history of podcasting. If you are not aware, podcasting was basically created by a journalist and former MTV VJ Adam Curry and his software developer friend Dave Weiner in the early 2000s. After the release of iPods, remember that back in the early 2000s, Dave Weiner created a way to distribute audio and video through RSS feeds, the real simple syndication feed that was used for blogs and news sites previously. Adam and Dave were looking for a way to download audio broadcasts like news and transfer it to the iPod to listen to offline or later or on the go. Using the RSS technology and Adam Curry's iPodder software, they were able to extract that audio and then upload it onto their iPods. In 2004, Adam started what can be sort of recognized as the first podcast, Daily Source Code, which covered his daily life and news and podcast advancements, and he also promoted other podcasts, which inspired other people to create podcasts, and so then it just starts to explode from there. And I was surprised to learn, actually, that the term podcast or podcasting was coined in 2004 by a journalist named Ben Hammersley. He was writing an article for the Guardian newspaper. And that's where that word came from. So, of course, in the next year, iTunes 4.9 was released and they had native support for podcasting, which made it even more accessible to people. And by the end of 2005, in December, podcast was added to the new Oxford American Dictionary as the word of the year. So, I mean, it was a relatively short time. Within 2001, we were able to distribute audio and video through RSS feed. To 2005, podcasting is a real thing. And then as we moved into 2009, when Mark Maron's podcast started and on from there, everything has just exploded to where it is now. Okay, so what does podcasting look like now? Well, it's estimated there's about 4.1 million podcasts with 170 million episodes. That's a lot of audio content out there. There's an estimated 465 million podcast listeners worldwide. That's over 20% of internet users. And I read that they're estimating that by the end of 2024, there will be over 500 million podcast listeners. Just close your eyes and imagine 500 million people that could potentially find your content. Like, that's incredible. Can you even picture 500 million people? I can't. And what are they listening to? And why are they listening? Well, 90% of people listen for education and enjoyment. And video content is growing in popularity with the rise of TikTok and on YouTube as well. And to top all of that off, let's talk about a little bit of money here. Podcast ad revenues are estimated to hit over $5 billion by 2027. If that doesn't inspire you or confirm that this industry is not going anywhere, like, that does it for me. You know, people are investing in this industry. They're investing in this content because listeners are engaged. Brands are taking podcasting more seriously to advertise as well because they know there's 500 million people listening to podcasts. So that's a huge, huge place where they can connect with their audience and potential new customers. Okay, so what does this mean for you as an entrepreneur or a creator? Podcasting can be like a secret weapon for you. It's not about a sales pitch. It's not about selling your product or service. It's about captivating your audience and establishing authority in your industry and connecting with your current and potential clients in such an authentic way. Podcasting can create a space for you to build trust. Your audience will not just be listening, but actively participating. Like I said, your audience can offer you real-time feedback and inspiration for future products and services, as well as rallying around you, your mission, your values, and your vision. And you know, I saw a stat somewhere in my research for this podcast that said that over 70% of podcast listeners polled say they visited an advertiser's website after hearing an ad read from a podcast that they listened to, and 62% say that they purchased. That's a huge number. That's a huge success rate, a huge return on investment. Podcasting can really, really help you build roots into your community and to your listeners and your customer base, and create a little club, a little special place to celebrate what you're building. And how does it get better than that? All right, friends. So what do you think? I learned a lot in researching this podcast. Like I said, I didn't know a lot about the history of where it came from. My introduction to podcasts was around 2011 with Mark Maron and Kevin Smith and that sect of podcasts. That was where I started out. What were the first podcasts you listened to? Are those creators still creating content? And what do you think about the stats of podcasting? 500 million listeners worldwide? That's crazy to me. Thank you so much for joining me today. I am so grateful to have you here learning about podcasting and content creation with me. I hope you can hang out next week. We're going to be talking about 5 things you should know before you start a podcast. There's going to be some really great information for you before you hit record. So I look forward to seeing you there. Thank you so much for listening. You can connect with me on Instagram or Threads. My username there is Podcast with Jen. I'd love to hear what you think about this episode, and we'll see you next week. Bye.